Hello fam, welcome back to the Eat Like Ruby podcast. I am back today doing another episode that I think is going to be the final episode to wrap up the convo we've been having recently about navigating nutrition and training at this time of year, possibly moving to maintenance, having a bit of flexibility with the diet, having a bit too much flexibility at times, and just what all of that can look like. So if you're a regular listener, you'll know that we've been having this convo for a few weeks now, and I just feel like there's a few loose ends, a few random notes that I've got that I just listened back to those episodes, or when I finished recording, I was like, oh, I think there's like a couple more things we need to touch on to really wrap up this convo. So that's what I'm going to do today. And if you haven't listened to those episodes, I'd say today's episode isn't going to make too much sense because I am just going to kind of pick up on a few things from those last few and just get straight into it. So I definitely listen to the last 4 episodes if you haven't. If you're a regular listener and you listen in real time and you're like, yep, Rubes, I'm right there with you. Keep this convo going. I'm going to keep it going for one more ep right now. And I don't want to reiterate too many things we've spoken about in those episodes. I feel like I get so passionate that I want to say the same thing like 100 times. And I feel like we do say it 100 times, but in 100 different ways. So people are okay with that. But I don't want to spend too much time covering shit we've already covered. But I feel like one thing that is always worth covering and just touching on as we come into this convo and just as we come into this time of year, and as a little bit of a side note already, the reason I speak so much about nutrition and training at this time of year and how to navigate it is because usually it's a more busy time of year than our standard normal routines and weeks, and B, usually we're around different foods and meals a lot more often. So when we talk about this stuff, we can also apply it to any other time in your life where you might find yourself in a similar situation. If you have really busy period times in your life, or if you have holidays, or you're staying with people, or you have people staying with you, like anything at all, really, whatever we speak about with the festive season and navigating nutrition and training and all of those things alongside it, really we're looking at navigating nutrition and training when we're super busy, like busier than normal, and when there's a lot of different foods and meals around on a really consistent, regular basis for a while. That's what we're looking at here. So take this info and apply it to any other time in your life when you find yourself in that situation. But that wasn't even my first point. My first point is the thing I always want to remind people, and I always touch on this, you can decide how you navigate this and to what extent. So what I mean there is, if you find yourself in the festive season or in any of those other times that I just said, and you decide like, I don't give a shit about that stuff, I am going to stay so on point with my usual nutrition and training. I'm going to be strict if I'm normally strict. I'm going to say no to things if I normally say no to things. I'm going to carry out my absolute usual habits, routines, choices, all of those things. You can definitely do that, right? If you're in the other camp where you're like, I just let everything go to shit as soon as it gets busy or as soon as Christmas gets here, that's totally fine as well. I don't really recommend it. I personally think there is a big sweet spot in the middle, and that's why I like to continuously have this convo and bring it forward, because I think we do have people who feel like they need to be super strict. We do have other people who feel like they need to let everything go to shit. And like I just said, if you make a conscious choice that you want to do either of those things, that's fine. Go off. I'm not here to tell people what to do. I'm here to educate people on how we can navigate it in different ways. If you're stuck in a mindset or you're quite narrow-minded, and I say that with love because sometimes people are just so used to doing things one way, they don't realize that they are narrow-minded and they don't realize there's other ways they can do them. That's exactly why I love to do these episodes, because I want to bring the awareness and be like, hey, there's other ways we can navigate this stuff. And then you can have all the information and you can decide, do I want to be super strict? Do I want to be super loose? Or do I want to find a sweet spot in the middle? And personally, I'm a big fan of the sweet spot in the middle. Obviously, we spend all year talking about like how to get after a fat loss goal, how to get after muscle gain, performance, all of those things. I like to think that if we're going to be on our shit for 10 or 11 months of the year, we can have a few weeks where we scale it back a little bit, be a little bit more chilled, but in an enjoyable, flexible way that actually makes us feel good. That's why I speak about this shit so much, because I get super passionate because I watch my girls work so hard all year, and we do it in an enjoyable way. We do it in a flexible way. We navigate different phases and different goals. But I think if you're going to work like a dog for 10 or 11 months and you're going to get after awesome goals, give yourself a few weeks where you can just enjoy the Christmas foods and the drinks and all the shit that comes with it. But like I said, not in a way that makes you feel like it's so different to what I normally do. I'm so, quote, off track. It's bad. It's all those things. Like I'm going to say a million times, there is that sweet spot, and that's really what I want to hone in on. So if you can relate to what I've just said and you haven't listened to the last 4 episodes, I would definitely do so. And then we're going to just touch on a few more things today that I think are just going to wrap it all up really nicely. And so the first little note that I had, first thing I wanted to touch on after I've touched on all those other things is not overthinking things too much, which can sound funny when it's like, well, we've just done 5 episodes about it. It's like, it's not that deep, but it's deep enough for 5 episodes. But one thing I just love to remind people is think about the fact, or just think about the concept of ticking the boxes any day that you can. And when I talk about ticking the boxes, my regular listeners or my Eat Like Ruby girls will know, I love to just think about ticking the boxes of getting enough fruit and veg, getting enough protein, like getting enough nutrients, being mindful of our portion sizes, whether we're actually tracking our nutrition to do that is awesome. If we're not tracking, but we are just being mindful of portions, that's awesome as well. Wherever you're at with your nutrition and whatever is like good nutrition for you right now, because obviously we speak about the fact that, quote, good nutrition can mean so many things. That's going to be different depending on the person and the situation you're in. But if we think about what good nutrition is for us personally right now, then we come back to that concept, like I said, of just thinking about ticking the boxes any day that you can, because I think people's minds can run away with them a little bit, where it's like, it's such a busy time of year and I've got like XYZ events on this week, and it all just starts to compile to a point where you think like, I don't know how to tackle this week. And I think it's important to stop for a second and go, well, let's imagine it's a week maybe with 2 events. Okay, cool. Well, that's 5 days that don't have events. And even if we look at it in terms of meals, let's say we eat 4 meals a day, 28 meals a week. Well, we're looking at 26 meals that we can tick boxes and control, and 2 meals that we can be flexible, moderate, and enjoyable with. So we've spoken about that, like how we can navigate those meals out. We've spoken about that heaps on the podcast. I'm not going to get into that too much today, but what I really wanted to point out here is think about just like any standard day where you can tick the boxes. And the reason I think this is so practical and enjoyable is because if I think about all of the girls that I work with, they're either like workers, students, mums, run their own business, a combo of all of these things, shift workers, like there's so much going on. And so what I'm getting at is usually we have to be somewhat organized with our nutrition, whether it's actually tracking and planning days, whether it's just writing shopping lists and planning like that, and then obviously bringing that shopping home. Maybe you're a meal prepper or you do a bit of food prep to make the week easier. Usually just because of being busy gals, we have some sort of organization in place with our nutrition. Like we have to eat, and most of us are shopping for other people, whether it's partners, families, whatever. Most of us do have to have that level of organization and preparation into our nutrition. So I think always come back to that. Like if your shopping day is Sunday or Friday or whatever you do, stop for a second and just go, okay, cool. If I'm planning food to whatever extent today for the next week, and I'm going to shop and I'm going to do whatever I usually do, stop for a second, just look for the days that are just standard normal days for you. Because like I said, you might be shopping on a Sunday and you might be looking at that next 7 days and going, oh, yep, shit, festive season's starting to kick in. We've got a kids thing on Wednesday night. I've got a work thing on Friday night, and we've got something on Saturday. Okay, cool. Well, straight away right there, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, we can have our absolute usual normal nutrition in place where we tick the boxes. And then even if we then look at those days where we have something on that's a little bit out of routine, yes, we have 3 of them. And like I'm saying, in our normal life, we probably aren't doing like social shit 3 nights a week. Maybe you are, but whatever. But if you're looking at that going, oh, that's a bit different to normal, that's a lot more than normal, you still want to look at it and go, okay, cool. Well, if Wednesday night is just like a school kids thing or whatever, does that really have to disrupt my nutrition that much? That's the first thing I'd be asking. And even if there is a meal or a time of the day where you're like, okay, cool, that's going to be a bit different to normal. Okay, cool. Well, the rest of the day can be normal. And we can reverse engineer our whole week like that, just to remind ourselves that 2 or 3 meals doesn't have to derail a whole week, or it doesn't mean we shouldn't bother being organized for the week. And I think that leaves people in a worse position. If you were to look at a week and go, oh, there's 3 things on, so I can't really nail my nutrition, I'm not going to bother at all. If you then found yourself in a position where you hadn't planned anything for the week, you hadn't shopped, you hadn't prepped, you hadn't done anything, you're going to wake up on Monday and go, what the hell am I eating today? And I think a lot of people can relate to that. It sounds funny, but I think people can relate to that, where it's like, you've had those times in your life where there's too much going on. So you've almost put it in like the too hard basket. But then you've woken up at times and been like, shit, we've got no food. Or like, I wasn't organized, nothing's ready. Like, it's just a shitty feeling. And then you end up buying shit on a whim or getting takeaway or having whatever you find in the back of the pantry. And it's like, that's what's making shit worse. 3 flexible, enjoyable, moderate meals in the week can still be and should be a great week of nutrition. If we let those things be a reason that we don't even shop or prep or do anything, we're going to line ourselves up for a terrible week of nutrition. So really important to just always come back to that and think, are there days and or just meals where I can just focus on ticking the boxes and doing my usual thing? And I think it starts to get a little bit off topic, but I think that helps make the enjoyable meals actually enjoyable. Think about a person, I say this when we talk about enjoying meals out, but I just think it's worth mentioning here as well. If we think about a person who went into that position, like I just said, where you've got too much happening, so you've thrown it in the too hard basket and you haven't organized any food for the week and you're literally just eating on a whim. If you are doing that, usually the food's not even that enjoyable because you're like literally are just eating whatever the hell you've still got in the pantry. You're not ticking boxes, so you're not physically feeling good. Mentally, you're in that state of being like, I'm off my game, shit's not good, whatever. Then you get to those actual events and things that should be quite enjoyable, but you've gone into them with 3 days or a week or whatever it is of shitty habits that have left you feeling shitty. And now you're just at another meal. Like you're going to view that meal as like, this is just another thing that I'm not on my game for. If you had been on your game, and remember that quote on your game can mean whatever the hell you want it to mean. But if you have been proactive about your week to put whatever you need to put in place to continue feeling good, you can continue feeling good through that week. Get to one-off events and occasions. Enjoy them for what they are. Get straight back to your usual shit that's making you feel good. And then you step back and you look at a week and you go, I ticked plenty of boxes. I made really good choices for my physical health. As a result, that left me feeling really positive and like I'm in control and I'm doing the shit I want to be doing. I enjoyed events and occasions and meals like that for the one-offs that they are. And overall, that's an amazing week. That is awesome. And that kind of segues me into my next point and the next thing I want to talk about. Obviously, I'm a pretty big fan of people going to their maintenance intake during this time of year. And also, like I said in a recent episode, more importantly, flicking our mentality over to a maintenance and our expectations over to expecting maintenance. Because if we think about that scenario I just said and that week that I just said, where you have a few days or most days where you tick boxes and you feel really good, you then have a few events and occasions that you enjoy in moderation, but you have some different meals, you enjoy some things, you indulge a little bit, but in that mindful, moderate way. If you're doing that with the expectation of maintenance, there's a few benefits there. There's a fair few benefits there. First of all, we know that our maintenance intake will always be a range, whereas when we're gunning for a really specific goal like fat loss, we need to be quite diligent and on point with an intake. So therefore, we need to be quite strict with our protocols and our habits to make sure we're hitting that intake. If we then look at the fact that our maintenance is a range, then we can be a little bit more flexible with our habits and our choices and everything, because it's easier to fall into a range than it is to hit a really on point intake. And the reason I'm saying this, guys, is because obviously if we think about having a few meals out every week where we're not tracking our food and we're not even really sure of what's in it and how it's going to add up. And also if we think about this time of year, we don't want to go into those meals thinking like, I wonder how this is going to add up for my calories. We just want to go in and enjoy them. So if we piece all that together, it's like, if we know that maintenance is a range and we can fall into quite a broad range, then we don't have to stress so much about nitpicking exact numbers. And I think I had this further down in my notes, something about nitpicking exact numbers, but it's worth talking about here. Okay, guys, I got to be fully honest. I am recording with my little French bulldog Nutella in the corner and he randomly just rolled over and started choking. If anyone has a Frenchie, you'll know, like 1 minute they're sleeping, next minute they're drama kings. So I had to run off and make sure he wasn't actually choking and dying. And I can't remember exactly the sentence I was saying, but I feel like I know where I was up to. So I'm going to try and pick up where I left off. But just know that that's what it's like over here. Welcome to my life. But again, we just pivot, we adjust, we adapt. I'm doing it in real time. So I think I was saying if we have adjusted our expectations to maintenance and obviously adjusted our habits and our intake and everything to maintenance, we don't have to nitpick the exact numbers so much, so we can have those box ticking days and those days that are actually on point with our maintenance intake. And I said this in one of those recent episodes where, you know, if you're having those consistent days at your maintenance intake, and then you have those few meals out and they pull that intake up a little bit higher, even though we're not tracking them, even though we're not like weighing the foods and, like I'm saying, nitpicking the numbers. We don't have to nitpick the numbers, but if those meals out and those occasions pull the average intake or the overall intake up a little bit higher, because maintenance is the range, we can still usually pretty comfortably fall in that maintenance range. And if we've adjusted our mentality and our expectations to maintenance, then that can be a really successful, enjoyable approach to take. So that's one of the main reasons I love to encourage people to go to maintenance right now. The other reason is if we think about setting up these box ticking days that I keep talking about, like I said before, if you look at your schedule and you're like, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday are just going to be like standard usual work dates for me. So I'm going to plan my days. I'm going to do my meal prep. I'm going to hit my protein, my fruit, my veg, all of those things. But if we also then connect the dots there with being like, oh my God, at work at the moment, people are bringing in a lot of Christmas treats, boxes of chocolates, all of those things. If we think about our maintenance intake usually being like 400-ish calories, maybe even more, higher than our deficit, if we're planning these days, like the days that we're actually planning and nailing all of our usual shit, if we're planning them to be at our maintenance intake instead of a deficit intake, then we can actually fit in some of those things in a really controlled, enjoyable way. So if we use that example I've used recently where maybe your deficit is 1,800 and your maintenance intake is like 2,200 or 2,300, if you're used to planning days at 1,800 and ticking off your protein, fruit, veggies, all that, you can still do that and then be like, I'm going to use my extra 400 calories every day on these Christmas things, on these work things, on whatever it is that you've got around you during this time of year that's going to be a little bit more enjoyable, a little bit more flexible. You can actually work with that. I said in recent episodes, set up your nutrition to work with the time of year instead of work against it. This is a perfect example of how we can do that. And I think this segues me perfectly into another very big point that I wanted to make today. I actually wanted to make it in one of the recent episodes and I just forgot all about it till I finished recording. But one thing we always want to remember, and I think some people know this, some people don't, we can forget it at times, but it's really important to come back to this. A kilo of body fat is 7,700 calories. And what we mean by that is we've spoken a lot before about the fact that obviously we consume calories, the body uses what it needs to because calories are energy, so the body uses the energy that it needs to. If there is an excess left over, aka we've given the body a certain amount of energy, it's used what it needs to, and then there's some left over that the body's like, I don't need to use this. You've given me more than I need. That is an excess of calories, aka an excess of energy. The body moves that into storage. And that is how body fat accumulation occurs because body fat is stored energy. Come back to what I just said, where a kilo of body fat is 7,700 calories. We don't need to know this that often because there's so many moving parts to the human body and to the diet and to calories in versus calories out and all of those things. So again, I don't like to nitpick numbers, but it is worth knowing and understanding that number because if we think about the fact that in order to put on 1 kilo of body fat, and this is where it's very important to remember everything we've spoken about on the podcast, where there's a very big difference between weight and body fat, right? And I might come back to that in a second, but to put on a kilo of body fat is 7,700 calories, meaning the body needs an excess of 7,700 calories coming in that it does not use and it moves into storage. And it's really important to even understand the term there of excess because if we think about a body that uses 2,000 calories for the day, we would need to literally consume 9,700 calories in that day to put on a kilo of body fat. No one is doing that. I've personally attempted a 10,000 calorie challenge before. So a day where I've like literally tried to consume 10,000 calories and I couldn't do it. And even if you think about for a second, my husband who competes in Ironman, like 12-hour Ironman event, he eats like 6,500 calories on those days, right? So if you're just a person who's ticking boxes and then going out for dinner, very, very, very unlikely that you're consuming 9,000 calories on those days. And it all sounds a bit funny and it sounds a bit crazy, but it's important to remember this because if we piece all this together with everything I just said and what we've spoken about in recent episodes, let's say you are hitting your maintenance intake 5 days of the week and then you have 2 days where you are having a meal out or something's a little bit different and it's probably a little bit higher cal. If you think about meals out, they're usually just higher cal than normal meals we have at home. And if you think about this time of year, there's usually some drinks and shit that comes with it, right? So if we assume that those meals are a bit higher cal, I think I said in one of the recent episodes, let's assume you're hitting 2,200 calories a day. And like always, apply this to your own numbers. But if we're hitting 2,200 calories a day and we go out and we have 2 meals for the week, and then therefore we have 2 days that include a meal that is higher calorie, let's say those days come in at like 3,000, even 3,500 calories, right? When we look at our average overall intake, it's going to leave us around the 2,500 calorie range as our overall average intake for the week, because we've had some days at 2,200, then some days up in that 3,000, roughly, right? Again, we do not need to nitpick the numbers. We can think about this as roughly, especially if we have adjusted our expectation to maintenance. Can we see how it all ties in together? And she had to do this one final chatty episode. But if we really think about this, and like I said, I don't like to nitpick these numbers all the time, but it's cool to remember these numbers to bring a little bit of logic back to this shit, because I think as this time of year goes on, or as any busy period goes on, people forget the logic and they get very caught up in their emotions and their energy of like, oh my God, everything's gone to shit. And it's like, no, let's bring it back to the logic for a second. If we keep looking at these numbers, let's say, like I said, if your maintenance is around 2,300 calories, give or take, if you are then hitting an average for the week of 2,500 calories because meals out or extra flexibility, higher calories, etc., are pulling up your overall average intake a little bit. Let's run with the assumption for a second that, quote, worst case scenario, and I'm going to come back to some non-worst case scenarios in a second, but let's run with the assumption that the worst case scenario is that we are consuming 100 to 200 calories each day above our maintenance if we're looking at our average intake for the week. And if you're a beginner, I might have lost you, but if you're an experienced gal, I think you'll be right there with me, which is awesome. I want to talk to you. And if you're a beginner, just listen back to other episodes, listen to this shit a few times, it'll all start to make sense. But if that means that we are consuming an excess of 100 to 200 calories every day, then we're consuming possibly an excess of 700 to 1,400 calories for the week. Let's remember that in order to put on 1 kilo of body fat, we need to consume an excess of 7,700 calories. If we are consuming an excess of 1,400 in a worst case scenario, lots of people that work with me as school teachers, you can run the maths on this. We're probably looking at like a fifth of a kilo, let's say, give or take. So what is that? 200 grams. 200 grams of body fat to have a really enjoyable, flexible, awesome week where you've really actually embraced and enjoyed the festive season and you've continued to feel good. And I've said in other episodes, like, can we give ourselves permission to have a little bit of wiggle room with that, to have a bit of flexibility, to be okay to carry that tiny little bit of extra weight right now? If we think about it, it is 200 grams, like I just said. And this is where, like I said, we need to remember the difference between weight and body fat, because we know that scale weight can fluctuate all the time anyway. And then we know that obviously if we're having meals out and different things like that, we can have fluctuations due to increases in food mass, carb intake, sodium, etc. So it's very common to jump on the scale and see an increase in scale weight after some of these meals. But if we can, in that moment, that's where we see people have the emotional energy and stuff. If we can come back to our logic and go, hang on, Rubes has explained fluctuations to me. She's explained what can happen after meals out. She's explained what it's going to take for me to put on an actual kilo of body fat. She's explained how I can get back into routine tomorrow. We literally did an episode the other week that was like, should I drop my calories the day after I have meals out? Shit like that. Like, we've covered so much of this stuff, guys. So it is so important to really piece it all together, especially when it comes to navigating different things like the festive season or anything similar, because I think we love hearing all this information and we can piece it all together when life's good and everything's working in our favor. When things start to feel a little bit iffy or a little bit different, we can forget everything that we've learned and that emotion can take over. So I really remind you to piece all of this info together during a time of year like this and look at the mindset stuff of being like, can I be okay with a little bit more flexibility? Can I prioritize other shit besides my weight and my body composition for a while? Can I prioritize that for the rest of my life? Side note, but at least give me a few weeks during the festive season. But really looking at that mindset side of stuff, can I just adjust my mindset a little bit to enjoy all this a little bit more? But then can I actually work with the facts and the education and all that Rubes has given me to really set up that sweet spot of like ticking boxes, but having the flexibility, the meals out, etc., and understanding the flow and effect and the consequences and how all that's going to look. And there's so many things flooding into my mind right now, and I'm like literally trying to stop myself from talking about them because I know we've spoken about them all so recently. But one of them is even thinking about that convo we had of like, can we just have a little bit of chill and a little bit of flexibility right now, and then refine things and tighten things up in January if we want to? So that's where all of this starts to piece together. If we can embrace this time of year a little bit differently, we can absolutely get after a fat loss goal or a body composition goal, a performance goal, anything like that in January. But like I said, if you've worked like a dog for 10 or 11 months this year, give yourself a few weeks where you just embrace other things and you enjoy other things. And then when you're feeling a bit iffy or questioning that, come back to all of this shit that we're talking about here. I'm not going to put on a kilo of body fat from one meal. I'm not even going to put it on from a week if we think about that scenario I just said. And that's where that can even tie back to something I said before, where if you let yourself put this in the too hard basket and go, oh, I do have so many things happening this week, there's no point putting effort into any day, even if we want to look at the numbers and the maths on that for a second. If you throw your hands in the air and go, I'm not going to put effort into any day of my week with my nutrition or whatever, and you then just do get into that habit of eating random shit from the pantry, getting takeaway every night, etc., you're probably a lot more likely to go into more of a calorie surplus and actually put that kilo of body fat on a lot quicker. So really tie it all in together and find that sweet spot. What days can I tick the boxes to actually keep my intake pretty much on point and have my good nutrition habits, good quality foods, and therefore physically feel like I'm in good health, and then mentally feel like I'm in a good place because I'm stoked with the way I'm tackling that. Enjoy the events, occasions, etc. for what they are. Understand that unless I actually eat 10,000 calories on one of these days, which like we've just pointed out is very, very, very hard to do, I'm not going to put on a kilo of body fat. If I can continue to navigate my nutrition like this for week after week after week of the festive season, let's look at that being 6 to 8 weeks. If we can carry that approach that I just said week after week for those 6 to 8 weeks, that's a wicked approach to take. And in my opinion, that is what's going to leave us in that sweet spot of enjoying it, but feeling good about it. And there was something in there that I said I'd come back to. If we were to have those meals out and then our overall average intake was to come up, and then I think I said in there like worst case scenario was we end up in like a 200 calorie a day surplus. What we also have to understand is that when intake increases, output can increase as well. And what I mean by that is if we have a higher intake coming in for a while, usually our output increases when it comes to things like training performance and training volume, like we can get after it more in the gym because we've got more energy coming in to do so. That makes a lot of sense. But then we can also have a higher output with our non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is just like our movement outside of the gym. So if you think about a person who's really hungry, deep in a deficit, really depleted, usually they're a bit slower. They've got a little bit less pep in their step because they're starving, right? Like you're not going to be bouncing off the walls when you're starving. I think most of us can agree on that. Flip that around to a person who's got energy coming in, like a big amount of energy coming in to the point where it's possibly a bit of an excess. A person who literally does have an excess of energy coming in probably is going to be bouncing off the walls. They've got literal extra energy in their system, right? So what that can lead to is, like I said, having more pep in your steps. So everything you're doing it with a bit more oomph, a bit more energy. Even me sitting here right now waving my hands, you'd argue that if I was deep in a deficit and really hungry, I'd probably be sitting here really still. And that seems like a small thing, but if we think about every bit of movement we carry out throughout our whole day, if we were to carry it out with more oomph, like I said, for lack of a better word, putting more energy into it because I've got more energy, then like I said, even though the energy intake is increased, the energy output can increase as well. So we don't have, or we might not have, as big of a surplus in place as we think. And that comes back to what I said before, where I don't like to nitpick numbers because we're never going to know all those numbers. You're never going to know exactly how many calories you burn sitting here moving your hands when you talk, and how that changes from how many calories I burn when I do that when I'm in a deficit versus how many calories I burn when I'm doing that right now. So that's why I don't like to nitpick numbers, because there's so many things that are going to contribute to our overall calories coming in and calories coming out. And those things are always going to be ebbing and flowing and moving and changing. But it's worth just noting that as the intake increases, one of those changes we commonly see occur is that the output increases as well. So therefore, the surplus might not be as big as we think. And that's where I said before, worst case scenario is we have a 200 calorie a day surplus coming in. If we just want to use like a really tangible example for a second, and we will nitpick the numbers for a second, let's just say purely like pulling numbers out of my ass. Let's say your maintenance is 2,300. And we have to remember maintenance is like the break even point where there's not a deficit in energy, but there's not a surplus of energy. So maintenance is essentially giving the body the amount of energy that it needs, right? Let's say for you, that's 2,300. If we then have more come in above that 2,300, let's say we have 2,500 come in, but then the body goes, hey, there's more here, I'm going to put a bit more pep in my step, then the body might now start to use 2,350 calories or 2,400 calories. Again, we're never going to know that exact number, but we want to understand the concept. We want to understand that as a bit more comes in, a bit more can start to go out. So therefore the quote maintenance intake might increase a little bit because of all those things. So again, that might be a little bit confusing for beginners. It might even be confusing for other people. And we don't have to think about that too much, but I wanted to bring it up because I want people to have all of this information or just be aware of all of this information so we don't just assume like, oh my God, anytime I eat quote off track or have a meal out or it's higher calorie or anything at all, everything goes to shit. There's so many factors that can come into play here. And I think the more information we have, the more we can just be mindful of those factors and go, yeah, okay, there's actually a lot more going on here. Time to chill. And there's a couple more little notes that I had that are worth mentioning. I think one of these is going to segue perfectly right here. So one thing I had in my notes is if we are a gym gal, which if you are, awesome. If you're a gym gal or if you're getting after performance goals, like you're a runner, things like that, it's worth thinking about what I just said and thinking about the fact that if we do have that little bit more energy coming in than we usually would, we can actually view that as a little bit of a positive thing and put it towards training. And that's not to say that we have to overtrain or do something crazy. But what I mean is if you're someone who's, let's look at a gym gal who's maybe hitting legs 2 or 3 times a week and you're getting after big lifts on your hip thrust or your RDLs or your hack squat, leg press, whatever, right? If you're getting after those things and you're going into a 6-week period where you're like, little bit more flexible with my nutrition. I've increased my intake to adjust accordingly, like Rubes keeps telling me to, and I've just got a little bit more coming in. How friggin' awesome, because next time I hit the hip thrust or the hack squat or the leg press, how friggin' convenient to have more energy coming in, to have more energy in my tank. So keep that in mind. And like I said, if you're a runner or you're getting after goals like that, there can be that real benefit there. And if we can flick our mentality, I think a really positive place to get to during this time of year is finding that sweet spot that I keep talking about where it's like I'm ticking boxes a lot of the time. So physically health is good and mentally I'm stoked with that. Because I've increased my intake and I've got a little bit of flexibility, probably got a little bit more energy coming in than I do the rest of the time. That's awesome because I'm getting after big lifts in the gym. That's unreal. I'm going to put that energy towards those. I'm going to enjoy the events and the meals and the occasions for what they are. The overall picture of this is like ticking boxes, feeling good, getting after big lifts, enjoying the festive season. Tell me that is not the sweet spot. There is a reason I harp on about this sweet spot, guys. That is it right there. And even that segues perfectly into my final 2 things I had on my list. Literally one of them, I'm just going to read it out because it says, physique or scale nitpicking will keep you stuck in a non-flexible place. I'll explain that in a second. And then I said, focus on performance or things outside of that you don't have to nitpick. So let's look at that for a second. Focus on performance or things outside of physique, scale, weight, etc. that you don't have to nitpick. Nitpicking, let's come back to that first point. Physique or scale nitpicking will keep you stuck in a non-flexible place. I'm going to say that again to really let that sink in because we want to embrace or we want to think about that all the time. Physique or scale nitpicking will keep you stuck in a non-flexible place. If you are literally nitpicking the number on the scale or nitpicking your physique, it is very hard to embrace what I just said with that flexibility and the meals out and being okay with the ebbs and flows and ups and downs, etc. Because come back to someone who is nitpicking a number on a scale or a physique, it's going to be very hard to then be okay with all those ebbs and flows and everything. And then if you come back to that other point, focus on performance or things outside of the physique and the scale, and you won't have to nitpick. So if you shift your focus, we said in that recent episode, I feel like I've even touched on it in this one. It's all starting to become a blur, guys, for you and for me. We're nearly there. But we said in recent episodes, if you can think for a moment, like, what is important to me? What are my priorities outside of body composition, outside of scale weight? This is such a great time of year to think about that, because if you decide my priorities right now are ticking boxes any day that I can, but enjoying any event or occasion or anything that comes up with my loved ones, if my kids have something on, if my partner has something on, if we have a family event, a friend's event, etc., my priority is to enjoy that, right? And that can segue back into the whole enjoying meals out convo. See how it's all very conveniently done for you? You're welcome. But if that's your priority, and then you're also like, my priority is then getting after it in the gym as well. Again, like I said before, that's a real sweet spot. But if you have decided that that's your priority and that's your focus during this time of year, instead of scale weight and nitpicking the physique to be the focus, then you can actually embrace those things. You can enjoy it. You can prioritize it. You can view that as successful. We spoke in recent episodes about the fact that if we can decide to prioritize and embrace other things, we can set plans around those things. We can succeed on those plans, and therefore we can deem this time of year successful. If we come over to a person who is nitpicking the physique and scale weight, that's going to need to tie back, like I said at the start of this episode. If you do want to be very, very, very strict with everything this time of year, that's fine, go off. And if you're wanting to nitpick physique and scale weight, personally, I don't think we should ever be doing that. But if you are, go off. I'm so hesitant to say go off because I don't think we should be doing that. But if we are stuck nitpicking those things, it's going to be hard to embrace everything else we've spoken about. So I think that's really worth thinking about. And the last thing I had on my list, it's actually in the middle, but I feel like it segues in here. I've just written, stop weighing yourself. And this is going to be up to the individual. You're going to have to use a bit of discernment. I said in a recent episode that sometimes people like to actually weigh themselves during a different phase like this to get comfortable with seeing the fluctuations. So it's not always a bad thing. So just have a think about, like, if that's you, if you're like, no, I'm actually learning a lot from seeing scale fluctuations, but watching them level out and actually starting to understand that can be beneficial. But again, I think you need to decide if it's beneficial for you or not. But the other thing that's worth noting here, and I'm going to talk about this in a few weeks, probably even next week. Actually, I'm going to do an episode about my own nutrition and training, but I've dropped it a little bit on the pod recently. I have not been weighing myself at all. So if we think about that note that I had there of like nitpicking scale weight will keep you in a non-flexible place, what's the best way to get around that? Stop looking at your scale weight. Funny that. So there's a lot to that, and people are going to be in different positions with that one. But I really want to start reminding people, obviously we've done a lot of episodes about scale weight over the years. We need to remind people that you don't have to take that. You don't ever have to take it again is a really important thing I want people to understand. But even if we want to look at this 6-week window of the festive season, if you've decided to prioritize other things, you've got to just stop for a second and go, okay, cool. So does it actually make sense for me to take it? And maybe it does if you are choosing, like I said, to learn about those fluctuations and navigate them, like practice navigating them. You might think, yeah, it does serve me to take it right now. But I think it's a very important question to ask yourself. Does it actually make sense for me to take that? Or am I just taking it out of habit? Am I taking it in a bit of I think people take it in like a see how much damage I've done kind of mentality, which is just not a reason to take scale weight at all. I think that's a whole nother convo. I actually don't have the energy to have a whole nother convo now, guys. I need to wrap this one up. But honestly, I would really just piece all this together and have a think about whether it serves you to take weight right now or not. And even if we tie that in with other episodes where we've said, like, you might be prioritizing other things right now, you might be at maintenance right now, having a bit of flexibility, all these things we've been talking about, and you might have a deficit or a fat loss phase lined up for the new year. So I would, if you're in that position, I would think, would it be actually enjoyable for me to have a bit of a break from that right now? It might make sense for me to start taking again in the new year if I want to, if that aligns with my goal. And if I know that that time is coming for me personally, it's worth just stopping right now and going, so could it be cool to have a break from it at the moment with my current goal and my current phase? I think I'm going to wrap this episode up there. I think she's yapped enough. Nutella didn't choke again. He's literally sleeping under my feet, so he's all well and good. I think we've covered the maintenance combo. I think we've covered the Chrissy festive season busy gal combo. I'm going to do an episode next week, like I said, just updating on my own nutrition and training before we start to wrap up the year. But thank you guys so much for listening. As always, I will be back with that episode next week. The Eat Like Ruby podcast is not a substitute for professional medical or dietary advice. The advice given in this episode is general in nature and should not be used to treat any medical conditions, health conditions, illnesses, injuries, and/or any nutrition-related conditions, deficiencies, or similar. This podcast is not to be used as or in place of medical advice or dietary advice. Please consult your healthcare professional before implementing any of the advice, information, or protocols discussed in this episode.